Member Vancouver-Fairview.
Is the chair giving me a new position? I'd be happy to step in as Minister of Justice, but
You'll be fine the way you are.
thank you, Chair. And before I ask some questions about what the Minister knows is one of my favorite subjects, targeted tax credits, I note that my colleague from Victoria Beacon Hill has graciously given myself and a couple of my colleagues the opportunity to ask some questions. So before it gets stale, I know she will take this up as well. I do want to respond to some of the statements the Minister felt he should read into the record, some of which were somewhat suppositional. I do appreciate that the Minister accepts that some of us have different points of view on taxation, but to say that that it is our view in the opposition that we should generally raise taxes is based on essentially nothing. It is true that we propose the same 2% upper income tax for people earning over $150,000 a year, for income over $150,000 a year, that the government took up in 2013, and that we would maintain it. It's also important to note that while the Minister talks about tax cuts and a low tax regime, we have spoken out for a fair and progressive tax regime, and not one that cuts a progressive tax system in the income taxes while consistently raising fees, hydro rates, car insurance fees, ferry fares, virtually every flat fee around that is a regressive form of taxation, because the truth is, Chair, that for the average British Columbian family or individual, if it's coming out of their pockets for things that they need, it's a tax. They don't see the difference, and it is not a discretionary tax. These are all non-discretionary. So having addressed what I think were perhaps some inaccuracies, or at least suppositions that I thought were necessary to challenge by the Finance Minister, I have a question with respect to the extension of the digital animation and visual effects tax credit to post-production work, which was contained in this budget and for which I commended the Minister. I asked the Minister a year ago in estimates, given that this was a promise in the Liberal Party's platform in the 2013 election, when we might expect it, and the Minister at the time, a year ago, indicated that it was the government's commitment to bring it in, but there was a cost factor, and the government needed to examine it and ensure that it would be brought in at an appropriate and affordable time. As it turns out, the value of this tax credit in this budget year is, as I read it, in any event, $2 million. And which, while not a small amount of money, is in the context of the budget relatively insignificant. People in the industry talk about the significant boost this will have to both the post-production work that's done in British Columbia, as well as the ability to draw in productions that are attracted by the ability to go from point A to point Z, including post-production. So my question to the Minister is, a year ago, had the Ministry not actually costed this tax credit? Was it indeterminate what the quantum would be, or was it just simply a matter of deciding that that $2 million would be better brought in at a different time than in the previous budget year?
Minister.
Thanks, Honourable Chair, and to the member. I won't dwell on this because I think we're moving on to other areas, but the member offered some peremptory comments. I think my assessment or my characterization of taxation priorities from the opposition, the member has characterized as suspect, or perhaps more strongly as unfair. I will simply add this observation, that when the initial provision was tabled and debated, and I don't know that the honourable member was here in 2013 when that. I don't believe he was in February of 2013 when. No. Because when this conversation reemerged, I searched in vain for some commentary from members of the opposition taking issue with the statutory sunset provision that was contained within the legislation at the time, and I did search in vain. There was no such criticism or observation. So I will, to use the words of the member's colleague, agree to disagree with the honourable member, and I think a fundamental component of the debate that should take place here in this place, besides the passage of the laws that govern society, is the allocation of fiscal resources. That is one of the two main functions we serve when we are elected here, and we will both, the government by virtue of the choices we make through instruments like the budget, reveal our priorities and our sense of what is fair and how society's interests and family interests are best served, and the opposition through its criticism of those choices, and hopefully occasionally by injecting an element of its view, its specific view of the alternatives, will ultimately provide some insight into its choices and its priorities. Maybe I should also add this, because the member offered his thoughts on the question of regressive nature of fees and other charges, and they undoubtedly add a burden. And I would say that I would embrace more fully the member's observations were it not for the fact that in a number of the examples that the member and his colleagues have raised over time, there is a specific element of relief for the lowest income British Columbians. So I think the member's argument and submission would be stronger in the case of MSP, which undoubtedly represents a burden. It is an additional burden on families. The charges, the costs associated with administering the healthcare system are very real. I think the member knows that. Billions upon billions of dollars. Were it not true that upwards of 800,000 British Columbians pay no MSP premiums, and 1 billion pay very much reduced MSP premiums, I think his argument would be stronger. But in that example and in others, there is relief, purposeful relief. The member might argue not sufficient relief, but specific relief given to lower income British Columbians. The question that the member ultimately advanced related to the extension of the tax credits, which he has correctly quantified from the budget as being in the range of $2 million. There were two reasons for the decision to delay moving ahead with that until this budget year. The main reason related to the fact we were still doing work endeavoring to quantify what it would cost, and we're reluctant to move ahead without having had the discussions that some of the officials had with the studios about what the definitions would mean, how much of the work would be captured, what it was likely to translate into in terms of costs. And I will concede to the honourable member, absent that analysis and that work, given what we thought was the narrow margin for error as it related to the projected surplus, I was reluctant to move ahead without having some of that additional work done. He has seen the product of that work and has correctly identified the amount we now believe that this extended credit represents in terms of a budgetary cost.
Fairview.
Thank you, Chair. And at the risk of the Minister continuing to have the last word on the subject, I'd simply say that while low-income relief on fees is welcome, it doesn't necessarily address middle-income families or individuals, and the whole nature of a progressive tax system is it is in fact structured in stages to deal with those issues. Honourable Chair, my next question for the Minister has to do with the tech sector, a sector that is doing very well in BC. I acknowledge that, the Minister acknowledges that, people on both sides of the House acknowledge that, and we welcome that because it helps cushion and insulate British Columbia and British Columbian workers from boom and bust resource cycles, notwithstanding how important resources are to our economy. Some time ago, as the Minister is aware, the BC Technology Industry Association outlined a 4-point plan for continuing to grow the sector beyond its fairly considerable 8%, I believe, of provincial gross domestic product and somewhere in the neighborhood of 85,000 highly paid workers. What the BCTIA pointed out was that we are experiencing a potential venture capital capacity grant for early stage investment in BC tech companies. And while the curve is going up in growth in the tech sector based on the current level of venture capital, if venture capital were to fall off more, the curve would level out and possibly dip. On the other hand, if we can attract more venture capital by some targeted measures of both the provincial and federal government, which would leverage private sector investment, I think the industry assumed at about 3-to-1, we could see a very substantial increase in the contribution of the sector. I think they projected a difference of about 31,000 additional jobs between 2014 and 2020, notwithstanding the fact that we're now in 2015, and a doubling of GDP to about 16%. Now, I wouldn't expect the Minister or his staff to simply take the work of the Technology Industry Association at face value, but to do research. But there were some very specific asks, and one of the things that the sector proposed, which may be a bit moot now in terms of availability of federal matching funds, was that the province attempt to work with the federal government to establish admittedly a sizable $100 million venture capital fund of funds that could be used to invest in early stage venture capital in the tech sector and leverage private sector investment. That has not been done. My question for the Minister is threefold. Besides the obvious that it costs money, what were the reasons that the Minister chose not to act to any degree on this request, whether it be at the $50 million provincial level that was requested or or some smaller level? What analysis of the beneficial impact and tax return that could be gained by such a fund was done by the ministry, if any? And I would ask that if that can be provided in writing at some point, or there may be aspects of such analysis that can't be provided for whatever reason, perhaps they're proprietary or advice to cabinet, but whatever could be provided, I'd like to see. And my third question is, excuse me, Chair, is the ministry actively looking at other means by which over the next 2 to 3 years steps could be taken by this government to enhance early stage venture capital investment in the tech sector in BC?
Minister?
Honourable Chair, apologies for the delay. I hope I'll cover all of the areas that the member has expressed the interest in. He's correct in pointing out that there was interest being expressed within the tech sector. Well, let me back up. I am gratified to hear or learn here again of the enthusiasm that exists on the part of the member for growth in the tech sector. Gratified to hear of the recognition being offered for what has taken place thus far, and the enthusiasm for seeing that continue and even accelerate. The member's correct about the interest that existed around the possibility of and the invitation that existed to participate in a federal initiative around venture capital. I would say this to the member: at the end of the day, and there was analysis undertaken, I don't want to suggest there was reams and pages of reports done. Ultimately, the hesitation related to two things. The member has anticipated one of them, the amount, $50 million. Although I suppose it would have been an option for us to explore a lesser amount if that was something that we wanted to explore. The way the fund was structured, however, and the member may know this or may not, made it clear to us that there was in participating in that endeavor, there was no guarantee that that those funds would be invested in British Columbia. And we saw that as a flaw in the structure from the point of view of management of the fund. I don't want to suggest that we were concerned that none of it would have been invested in British Columbia. I think we have a robust sector that fund managers would have recognized. And as I recall, we may have even had some exploratory conversations about where fund management would have been located as a way of trying to compensate for our concerns on that front. But at the end of the day, made the decision that it would be difficult for us to justify that measure of investment in circumstances where it was far from clear whether the funds would be put to work, or even a sizable portion of the funds would be put to work in British Columbia. We also had some structural concerns around the risk elements and who was going in first and the security associated. Now, these are venture capital funds, and there is inherent risk involved. The performance, on the other hand, is something like the Renaissance Fund, where the government, I think in 05 or 06, set aside $90 million, and I can advise a member $60 million of that is now at play, and there remains about 30 million? 30 million for allocation. So therein lies, to the member's question about what represents an alternative approach. And of course, the budget also increased by $3 million the allocation to the venture capital tax credit. So that's I hope a fairly direct answer about what our hesitation was around participating in the scheme being advanced by the federal government. No doubt there were people in the tech sector that saw that as a positive opportunity. For the reasons I've alluded to, we chose not to participate.
Member?
Thank you, Chair. And the Minister anticipated my next question, which had to do with the $3 million lift to the small business venture capital tax credit, which I believe is a one-time lift, if I'm not mistaken. And the rest of the question has to do with, again, this is a quantum substantially less than that proposed. I understand people may start with bigger asks than they expect or they need, or they may not. That is not always the case. But was there a rationale for picking that number as opposed to a bigger number? Did it have to do with money available? Did it have to do with what the minister and his staff thought that the investment market could absorb, or is there another reason?
Thanks, Honourable Chair. So the $3 million, I'm reminded, brings the aggregate amount to 33 million, which facilitates on the part of the company's access to upwards of $110 million in equity. And the member's correct. There are certainly advocates for more than that. I'm told the subscription rates on this are very healthy, so that's good news, and a sign, I suppose, of demand, and maybe a sign as well of the health of the sector, as alluded to by the member in his introductory comments. So one of those circumstances where the rationale for doing more is there. We settled on an amount that we thought was affordable, justifiable, and remain hopeful that we will continue to see the positive positive outcomes that we've seen thus far.
Thank you, Chair. And finally, there was a request by the BCTIA to consider a lift in the total capitalization in the eligible business tax credit from 5 to 10 million, as well as eliminating the cap and expanding the carry forward duration from 5 to 10 years. This was not in the budget. Is this something that the ministry is taking under consideration? And if not, why not?
Minister.
Thanks, Honourable Chair, and to the member for raising these issues and questions relating to the tech sector. I think what I would firstly say, just in a general way, is when we're dealing with tax credits, that quite legitimately attracts scrutiny in terms of what kind of behaviour the government is endeavouring to incent, and secondly, whether we are incenting that behaviour. We're monitoring. I don't want to leave the member of the committee with the suggestion that there was some hostility to the notion being advanced, but I think we're still at a stage where we're wanting to monitor the behaviour that the existing program is incenting, and something this will undoubtedly come up through the budgeting cycle.
Division has been called in the main house, so we will recess.
And we're all back again. I'd like to get Committee of Supply Section A. We're back in session. Member.
Thank you, Chair. And just as the bells were ringing, I want to make sure I understood the last question, that the ministry had some question about the value of changing that particular tax credit, either the quantum of the capitalization or the duration, but there is some consideration being continually given to it?
Minister.
That is correct.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. And my final question for the minister has to do with I'm always trying to remember how to say this in full, Scientific Research and Experimental Development Tax Credit, the SHRED credit. And anecdotally, I've talked to a number of people in the sector who talk about the application process being extremely lengthy and onerous. Now, granted, this is primarily a federal issue, but that the nature of the application actually no longer reflects the way they keep records or the way in the tech sector things are done. So it's kind of there's a bit of dissonance that the application form and the necessary information haven't evolved as the nature of developing the businesses has evolved. So I'm just curious whether the minister has heard the same thing, and whether there are any discussions being undertaken with the federal government to try to ease for many small companies in particular in the tech sector is a bit of an onerous process to get a very valuable tax credit.
Minister.
Thanks, Honourable Chair, and to the member who has sort of correctly identified the fact that the province in this case sort of tacks onto a process that is driven by largely by the federal program. I'm reminded that some changes were made 7 or 8 years ago relating to challenges that arose with respect to agencies conducting the research and then applying and then discovering that someone had determined they weren't eligible, and so some changes were made in that respect. We're not, I'm advised, alive to the details of the concerns that the member has brought to the committee. Our next step in that respect would be, one, to contact the federal administrators of the program to ascertain whether or not some of those challenges are revealing themselves, and secondly, to take from the member any more specific information that he might want to pass along relating to challenges that have arisen for constituents or members of the tech sector.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. And in fact, the issue as it was expressed to me quite a few months ago was not so much one of eligibility, but just as an onerous process that appeared to contain steps or requests for documentation that no longer seemed relevant. But I appreciate the Minister inviting me to bring details to his attention, and if I gather up some specifics, I'll accept that invitation. And with that, I am done with my questions. I thank the Minister and his staff very much.